Should Russia be let back into the Olympics? In July 2026, the International Olympic Committee voted to lift its suspension of the country's Olympic Committee, thereby readmitting Russia to the international sporting fold. As expected, the decision has caused an outcry. In addition to strong criticism from Ukraine, others have denounced the move, arguing that it rewards Moscow's aggression against its neighbour. So, what exactly lay behind the decision? And more broadly, can or should sport ever be truly separated from politics? International relations is rarely confined to the high politics of interstate diplomacy. Recognition and legitimacy are also conferred by participation in other fields. One of the most important of these is sport. To be admitted to an international sporting body and allowed to compete under a national flag is to be accepted as a member of the international community. Likewise, exclusion from sport can be a form of punishment, every bit as symbolic as a diplomatic expulsion from a political institution. This is precisely what makes the case of Russia's suspension from the Olympic movement so significant. Following the invasion of Ukraine, the Russian Olympic Committee was suspended from the International Olympic Committee, the IOC. However, that ban has just been overturned. But while the IOC's president insists that sports and politics are separate spheres and that the decision is no way an endorsement of Russia's aggression, the decision nevertheless shows how closely connected the two spheres really are. Founded in 1894, the IOC is the governing body of the Olympic movement. Overseeing more than 200 national Olympic committees, it also works alongside dozens of international sporting federations, covering everything from archery and athletics through to football, wrestling and swimming. Although the IOC has always maintained that sports and politics should be kept separate, controversially allowing the 1936 Olympic Games to be held in Nazi Germany, these lines have often been blurred. For example, from the 1960s, South Africa was barred from the Olympics over apartheid, returning only after the system had been dismantled. Similarly, Rhodesia was barred in the 1970s over its own racist white minority rule. Following on from this, as Yugoslavia collapsed in the 1990s, leading to a series of brutal wars in the Balkans, Serbian and Montenegrin athletes were prevented from competing under their national flag, instead appearing as independent competitors. In each case, the ban had wide-reaching effects. South Africa's exclusion became a rallying point for the wider international anti-apartheid movement, assuming a moral and diplomatic weight that went far beyond the pitch or the track. Meanwhile, the Yugoslav case underscored the point that individual athletes with no direct role in a conflict could still be caught up in the collective punishment of their state. Since then, the link between sports and politics has continued to be heavily debated. While many argue that the two should be separated, others have suggested that in fact you can't separate one from the other. And it's this that lies at the very heart of the latest controversy over Russia. As a star performer at both the Winter and Summer Games, Russia, as the successor of the Soviet Union, has long been a dominant force at the Olympics. However, in recent years, it's faced several bans. The first of these came after a state-sponsored doping program was exposed following the 2014 Sochi Winter Games. In 2017, the country was banned from competing at the Olympics. Instead, Russian athletes took part as Olympic athletes from Russia. But the key moment came with the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Condemning Moscow's actions and accusing neighbouring Belarus of facilitating Russian aggression, the IOC recommended that international sporting federations exclude Russian and Belarusian athletes and officials wherever possible. Although this restriction was eased the following year to allow individuals who hadn't supported the war to compete in Olympic events, and the ban on Belarusian athletes was completely lifted in May 2026, the IOC formally suspended the Russian Olympic Committee in October 2023 after it admitted sporting associations from occupied areas of Ukraine. While Russian sportsmen and women could compete as so-called individual neutral athletes at both the Paris 2024 Summer Games and the 2026 Milan Winter Games, they were only allowed to do so in non-team sports and on the condition that no flags or anthems were displayed or played and that they passed all the necessary doping tests. I'm just going to take a second here to say that if you're finding this useful, please do give it a like and perhaps subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It all really helps. Many thanks, and now back to the video. While many felt that Russian athletes shouldn't be allowed to compete at all, others insisted that the suspension of the Russian committee was an acceptable compromise, formally punishing Russia while allowing individual athletes who'd spent years training to compete. However, on the 7th of July 2026, the IOC's executive board announced that it had provisionally lifted the suspension, a move that came after the Russian committee removed the regional sports bodies operating in the Ukrainian territories Russia illegally annexed in 2022. Explaining the decision and reiterating the wish to separate sport and politics, IOC President Kirsty Coventry insisted that the move didn't amount to an endorsement of Russia's war against Ukraine. The IOC remained firmly opposed to all acts of aggression. Instead, it had been taken in response to a specific issue. In the meantime, Russian government officials remain barred from Olympic events and Russia still can't host international competitions. Likewise, the question of whether Russian athletes will compete under their own flag and anthem at the Los Angeles 2028 Summer Games will be discussed at a later stage. In addition, and crucially, the IOC's decision is merely a recommendation. Individual national federations and other sporting bodies still have the right to set their own rules. And while World Athletics has so far indicated that it won't follow suit and readmit Russia, football's governing body, FIFA, has said that it's still weighing its own response. Needless to say, the decision has provoked strong reactions on both sides. While Russian officials have welcomed the move, arguing that the Olympic movement should remain free from politics, Ukrainian athletes and officials have strongly condemned the decision. Likewise, it's been widely criticised elsewhere, with many countries lining up to condemn the move. But just how should we understand the decision? On the one hand, many insist that there's a good case for the IOC's move. Leaving aside the general argument that sport and politics should be kept separate, the Russian Olympic Committee has reversed its decision to incorporate sports organisations from the areas of Ukraine under Russian occupation. This is a substantial defeat for the Kremlin, which insists that the territories have been annexed and are now fully incorporated into the Russian Federation. The Russian Olympic Committee's decision to remove these bodies shows that this isn't the case and that Moscow has to accept that its actions in Ukraine will not be legitimised on the international stage. Meanwhile, more broadly, others have suggested that the decision to ban Russia always smacked of double standards. If Russia can be penalised for its actions in Ukraine, then what about other countries? For example, why hasn't Israel been suspended for its occupation and de facto annexation of Palestinian territories? And what about the United States and its war against Iran? Shouldn't this also be punished? And then there's the case of Iran's proxy conflicts against Israel. Many would argue that state sponsors of terror should also face serious consequences. The list goes on and on. In an increasingly complex and conflictual world, the fair and equal application of such bans would result in many more countries being barred from sporting competitions. But while these may indeed be powerful arguments, many would nevertheless insist that there are equally strong reasons not to lift Russia's suspension. For a start, the precedent that political actions carry wider consequences has long been accepted, as seen with South Africa and Yugoslavia. In this sense, it isn't a discriminatory anti-Russian step. It's a stand against a serious and destabilising violation of international law. Besides, the current arrangements in fact allow Russians to compete, just not as teams or under the Russian flag. More to the point, as long as Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues, lifting the ban sends the wrong message. Although the IOC may argue that its decision doesn't legitimise the Russian invasion of Ukraine, critics contend that lifting the suspension signals a degree of acceptance of Russia's war against its neighbour and its ongoing occupation of Ukrainian territory. To this end, there's now broader concern about setting a new precedent. If an Olympic suspension can be weathered through patient diplomacy and careful legal manoeuvring, the punishment risks losing its deterrent value altogether, not only for Russia, but for any future countries that choose to embark on wars of aggression. Ultimately, the episode illustrates that sports can't be truly separated from politics. Indeed, the IOC's claim to stand apart from politics while still imposing bans is itself a political position. Either it has a blanket ban on political bans, or it doesn't. Choosing the criteria for exclusion, the timing for readmission, and the eventual pace of reintegration are all judgments with real diplomatic and political consequences, whether they're framed that way or not. And it's for all these reasons that as long as international sport remains an important means of conferring valuable recognition and legitimacy on states and governments, decisions about participation will remain entangled with the wider currents of world politics, however much sports governing bodies might wish otherwise. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find interesting. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next one.